Hello friends, welcome to the HFY Ode, where we bring you the new science fiction stories for you, and new adventure, new world.
They called her the Ghost, not because she was scary, not because she was fast, because when they ran the combat sims, when the lights dimmed and the hollow screens flickered to life, she simply wasn't there. The other cadets, a dozen species from a dozen systems, would check their HUDs, see her IFF tag hovering in the corner of the marshalling bay, and then watch it vanish the second the exercise began. A flicker, a glitch, a girl who forgot to show up. That's what they thought. That's what they always thought. The ceiling of the Galactic Union's Joint Combat Academy was a single pane of smart glass, polarized to show the raw vacuum of space. Cadet Mira Vance liked to stare at it during briefings. It was easier than looking at the others. The Thullian beside her, a four-armed granite pillar named Kvar, kept cracking his knuckles. All 12 of them, a sound like rocks being ground to dust. 2 rows ahead, a Xylo's drone floated, its single optic lens swiveling with predatory stillness. Everyone here was a predator. Everyone except her. She was 5'4" in lift boots. She had a lazy eye that drifted when she was tired and a scar on her hip from falling off a hoverbike at 14. Her file said, Homo sapiens. Terran origin. Unmodified. The last word was the killer. Unmodified. In an academy where the weakest cadet could punch through a steel plate or process combat data at quantum speeds, being unmodified was a polite way of saying obsolete. Your species has a remarkable capacity for self-deception, said Instructor Vex, a Serenid whose lower body was a mass of bioluminescent tentacles. He slithered past her desk during the 3rd week, his voice a soft, horrifying whisper. He'd been reviewing her psych eval. You genuinely believe you can will yourself to survive, as if desire is a factor in physics. Mira kept her eyes on the smart glass. A distant star blinked. Yes, sir, she said. He paused, waiting for the defense, the bluster, the righteous anger he loved to crush. It never came. She just sat there, hands folded, looking for all the world like a librarian who had wandered onto a battlefield. He made a note in his datapad. Subject displays learned helplessness. Recommend psychological discharge. Then he slithered on. Learned helplessness. That was the polite term. The truth was simpler. Mira had learned to be small. On Earth, before the draft, she'd worked in a deep-sea salvage yard, pulling wreckage from the Mariana Trench. It was a job that taught you 2 things. First, that pressure is a liar. It tells you you're about to die long before you actually have to. Second, that the loudest thing in the room is rarely the most dangerous. The most dangerous thing in the trench was the quiet, the cold, the thing you couldn't see until it was already on top of you. She tried to explain this to her roommate, a jovial, fur-covered Borean named Jax. Jax was built like a barrel and smelled like cinnamon. He was the only cadet who didn't look at her like she was a ghost. You have to do something, Mira, he said one night, tossing a stress ball against the wall. You scored in the bottom percentile on the live fire drill. Again, Kvar is calling you the spare part. Kvar calls everyone a spare part, she said, not looking up from her boot. She was re-stitching a seam. The Academy issue boots were garbage. The stitching failed after 3 days. He means it when he says it about you. She tied off the thread. Bit clean. Let him. Jax threw the ball harder. It smacked the wall with a wet thwack. You don't get it. This is an Earth, Mira. This isn't some salvage yard. Out here, if you're quiet, they don't think you're dangerous. They think you're prey. He wasn't wrong. The Academy operated on a simple hierarchy. The loudest predator ate first. The Thullians crushed. The Xylos outthought. The Sirenids manipulated. Humans, in the collective wisdom of the Galactic Union, were the surprise species. Not because they were strong, but because they were stupid enough to try anything once. They'd join a fight they couldn't win. They'd sacrifice themselves for a comrade. They'd feel things during a firefight, which was considered a catastrophic tactical error. Human battle doctrine was a joke. The official Union history called it emotionally unstable aggression. Humans called it Tuesday. The turning point came during the simulation of uncontrolled variables, or the sim of screams, as the cadets called it. It was a nightmare scenario, a derelict research vessel infested with a hive mind parasite that mimicked the voices of dead loved ones. The goal was simple: get to the core, retrieve the data, and get out. The parasite couldn't be killed by conventional weapons. It had to be outthought. Kvar led the assault team. He was good, methodical, powerful. He smashed through 3 bulkheads while the Xylos drone mapped the parasite's neural frequency. Mira was assigned to rear security, which was a fancy way of saying the one they'd leave behind if things got tight. She took her position in a coolant pipe junction. The air was cold. The walls wept condensation. And then the voices started. Mira, baby, come home. Her mother's voice. She hadn't heard it in 6 years. Her mother was dead. Lung cancer. The parasite didn't know that, of course. It just scanned her brain, found the warmest memory, and twisted it. You left me, baby. You left me alone. Mira closed her eyes. Her hand drifted to the scar on her hip. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just breathed. Over the comms, chaos erupted. Kvar was roaring, swinging his massive arms at empty air. The Xylos drone was emitting a high-pitched shriek. Its logic core was stuck in a loop, hearing the voice of its creator, a being it had never even met. The team was falling apart. Not because they were weak, because they were heard. And Mira? She was quiet. She pulled a small, non-regulation tool from her belt. A sonic emitter, jury-rigged from a salvaged comms unit. She'd built it in her bunk over 3 nights, while Jack snored. She didn't tell anyone. She never told anyone anything. She tapped the emitter against the pipe. Top, 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 top. The parasite's voice stuttered. Mira, Mira, Mira. It was a pattern, a stutter, a glitch. The hive mind ran on perfect replication, on emotional resonance. It couldn't handle a wrong note. It couldn't handle a human who didn't answer back. She stood up, walked past Kvar, who was curled in a fetal position, weeping, walked past the Xylos drone, which had powered down in confusion. She walked right up to the core, a pulsing organic mass the size of a small car, and pressed the sonic emitter against its membrane. Then she sang. It wasn't a song. It was a lullaby. A stupid, simple thing her mother used to hum when the power went out and the dark pressed against the windows of their trailer. Off-key. Imperfect. Human. The membrane rippled. The parasite tried to mimic the sound and produced a horrible, scraping dissonance. It couldn't replicate the waver in her voice, the catch in her throat, the grief that was not a weapon, but a frequency. She pulled the data core, walked out. When the simulation ended and the lights came up, the other cadets stared at her. Kvar's face was wet. He looked at her not with gratitude, but with something worse, confusion. You didn't feel it? He asked. I felt it, she said. I just didn't listen. Instructor Vex watched the replay 17 times. He slowed it down. He analyzed her vitals. Her heart rate had spiked during the first voice, her mother's voice, and then it had flattened. Not stopped. Flattened, like she'd reached inside her own chest and turned a dial from panic to wait. He deleted his earlier note about psychological discharge. He wrote a new one. Subject displays anomalous emotional regulation. Recommend further observation. Then, he deleted that one too, because he realized, with a cold ripple through his tentacles, that he had no category for what she'd done. The sim was designed to break minds. It had broken Thullians. It had broken Xylos. It had not broken the human. And she hadn't even raised her voice. The Academy didn't know what to do with her after that. They couldn't dismiss her field performance, while unorthodox, was technically perfect. But they couldn't promote her either. Promoting a human, an unmodified human, ahead of genetically engineered warriors would cause a political firestorm. The Thullian delegation would scream. The Xylos collective would file a formal protest. So they did what bureaucracies have always done. They buried her. She was assigned to a dead-end logistics track. Inventory management. Supply chains. The kind of work that won no medals and made no headlines. Her official designation was Quartermaster Specialist. Her unofficial designation, whispered in the mess hall, was the Ghost's errand girl. Jax was furious. You saved their lives. You walked through a psychic meat grinder, and you didn't even flinch. Mira shrugged. She was stacking ration packs. I flinched. You just didn't see it. That's my point. They don't see you. She didn't answer. She was thinking about the Mariana Trench, about the pressure, about how the fish down there didn't have eyes because there was no light, but they had teeth. Big, stupid, desperate teeth. They didn't need to see. They just needed to bite. The crisis came 6 months later. A border skirmish with the Croth, a silicon-based species from the Cygnus arm. The Croth didn't fight like organics. They didn't have ships, not really. They had hives, massive, semi-sentient asteroids that crawled through space at sublight speeds, shedding shards like spores. A single shard could embed itself in a Union cruiser and rewrite its metal, turning the hull against the crew. It was a slow, horrifying death. The kind of death that made you beg for a bullet. The Union's finest ships were being torn apart. The Thulian battle fleet, all brute force and plasma cannons, couldn't hit what they couldn't see. The Xylo's tactical networks, all logic and probability, couldn't predict a mind that didn't have one. The Croth didn't think. They just were. They were the trench. They were the pressure. And the Academy, in its infinite wisdom, decided to send its cadets on a training exercise to the front lines. A PR move. A way to show the galactic news networks that the next generation was ready. Mira was not on the combat roster. She was on the supply roster. She spent the 5-day transit in a cargo bay the size of a closet, cataloging ammunition crates and listening to the muffled sounds of the other cadets boasting in the corridor. I'll take down a dozen cross shards before breakfast. That was Kvar. Probability of success is 87.3%. That was the Xylo's drone. Just try to keep up. That was a Surinid named Lyra, who had once told Mira that her face was reassuringly forgettable. Mira cataloged. She checked the seals on the cryo canisters. She restitched the seam on her left boot, which had come undone again. The battle began at 0600 ship time. Mira watched it from a porthole in the cargo bay. The Croth Hive was beautiful in the way a hurricane is beautiful. A swirling mass of dark, refractive crystal, catching the light of a distant star and throwing it back in fractured, angry rainbows. The Union ships opened fire. Plasma bolts splashed against the hive's surface, harmless as rain. Then the shards came. They were small, no bigger than a human fist, but there were millions of them. They moved like a flock of birds, changing direction without inertia, swarming the nearest cruiser. The cruiser's shields flickered, buckled, and then changed, the metal itself turning from silver to a sickly, organic black. The screams over the open comm channel lasted 11 seconds. Myra's hand drifted to her hip. The scar. The comms erupted. Kvar's voice panicked. They're inside. They're inside the hull. The Xylo's drone. Shields are compromised. Recommend immediate retreat. Instructor Vex. All cadets to escape pods. This is not a drill. And then, beneath all of it, a sound Mira knew well. A sound you only heard in the trench, right before the pressure one. Silence. Not the silence of peace. The silence of a comm channel going dark because everyone who could speak was already dead. She should have gone to an escape pod. She was logistics. She was nobody. She was the spare part. Instead, she opened her cargo bay. She had been cataloging for 6 months. She knew every crate, every box, every stupid, overlooked piece of equipment that the combat cadets had sneered at. She walked past the plasma rifles, past the grenades, past the shiny, expensive things that went boom. She stopped in front of a crate marked Terraforming Supplies, Class 9. Inside were 4 canisters of liquid nitrogen, a portable thermal drill, and 300 meters of reinforced cable. Not weapons. Tools. The Croth shards operated on heat. They were silicon-based. They needed a specific temperature range to maintain cohesion. Cold enough to stay solid, warm enough to stay reactive. The Union ships ran hot. Fusion cores, plasma conduits, body heat. The Croth weren't attacking the ships. They were feeding. Mira strapped a nitrogen canister to her back. She grabbed the thermal drill. She walked out of the cargo bay, into the corridor, toward the sound of screaming. The first shard found her at the intersection of Section 7 and 8. It was a jagged thing, floating in the zero-G, its surface shimmering with a malevolent intelligence. It shot toward her face. She didn't dodge. She didn't shoot. She raised the thermal drill and hit the trigger. A jet of superheated plasma, the kind used to melt permafrost on frozen moons, lanced out. The shard didn't have time to change its trajectory. It flew straight into the beam and screamed. Not a vocal scream. A crystalline shriek, a vibration that rattled her teeth and made her vision blur. Then it shattered. 1,000 pieces of dead crystal, drifting in the air like dark snow. She kept walking. She found Kvar in the forward observation deck. He was pinned beneath a collapsed bulkhead, his forearms straining to lift it, but his lower body was already turning black. The shards had gotten to him. His silicate-based skin, normally as hard as diamond, was flaking away, crumbling like old concrete. "Go," he said. His voice was wet. "Ghost, go." She knelt beside him. She didn't tell him it would be okay. She wasn't that stupid. "Where's the breach?" she asked. "Everywhere." He coughed. A piece of his jaw fell off. They came through the hull. The hull became them. She looked up. The ceiling was rippling. The metal was softening, pulsing, growing crystalline growths. The ship was turning into the enemy. The pressure, she thought. The quiet. She pulled the nitrogen canister off her back, cranked the valve to maximum. A cloud of white vapor exploded outward, so cold it made her breath fog and her exposed skin prickle with frostbite. The ceiling stopped rippling. The crystalline growths cracked, shattered, fell. Cold. The Croth hated cold. She dragged Kvar, all 400 pounds of him, into a maintenance closet, sealed the door, hit the environmental override, dropped the temperature to -50 Celsius. "Stay here," she said. He was shivering. His remaining eye was wide. "You're going back out there?" She didn't answer. She was already gone. The next hour was the longest of her life. She moved through the dying ship like a fish through the trench, quiet, cold, invisible. She found the Xylo's drone in a service duct, its optic lens cracked, its logic core spouting gibberish. She couldn't fix it, but she could carry it. She tucked it under her arm like a football and kept moving. She found Lyra, the Sirenid, trapped in a decompressed compartment. The Sirenid's bioluminescence was flickering, dying. Without pressure, her body was shutting down. Mira sealed the breach with a patch of hull sealant and a prayer. Lyra looked at her with something that wasn't gratitude. It was awe, the kind of awe you feel when you see a mouse fight off a cat. "Ow!" Lyra whispered. Mira checked her nitrogen levels. "Almost empty." "You just keep moving," she said. "You don't stop. You don't think. You just move." She reached the engine core at 0715. The Croth had made a nest there, a pulsing organic mass of crystal and stolen metal, feeding directly from the fusion reactor. It was warm. It was happy. It was growing. Mira had 3 minutes of nitrogen left. Not enough to kill it, just enough to make it angry. She sat down, crossed her legs, and pulled out her comms unit. She didn't call for help. She didn't call for backup. She patched into the ship's internal broadcast system, the speakers in every corridor, every compartment, every escape pod, and she started a hum. The lullaby. Off-key. Imperfect. Human. The Croth Hive paused. It didn't understand the sound. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a command. It was just noise. Chaotic, emotional, biological noise. The kind of noise that didn't come from a machine. The shards hesitated. They drifted closer, curious. Mira kept humming. She watched the nitrogen gauge drop. 2 minutes. 1 minute. 30 seconds. The Croth Hive pulsed. A single shard detached from the mass, floated toward her face. It stopped an inch from her nose. She could see her reflection in its surface. Pale, tired, scarred. She stopped humming. "Cold," she whispered, and she cracked the nitrogen canister open with her teeth. The explosion was not large. It was not dramatic. It was a simple, physical reaction. Super cold gas meeting superheated silicon. The Croth hive convulsed. Cracks raced across its surface. The shard in front of her face shattered into a million pieces, each one catching the light. And for a single, perfect second, she was surrounded by a galaxy of dark, broken stars. Then, the ship lurched. The fusion reactor went critical. And Mira Vance closed her eyes. She woke up in a medical bay. White lights. White sheets. The smell of antiseptic and something floral, probably a Xylo's calming agent. Her entire body ached. A deep, bone-level ache that felt like she'd been used as a punching bag by a Thullian. Which, technically she had. Kvar had hugged her. After the rescue. With all 4 arms. It had cracked 2 of her ribs. "You're an idiot." Jax. He was sitting beside her bed, his fur matted, his eyes red. He looked like he'd been crying. "I know," she said. Her voice was a croak. "The ship is gone. The Croth is gone. They're calling it a miracle." It wasn't a miracle. It was a canister of nitrogen and a really bad lullaby. He laughed. It was a wet, broken sound. They don't know what to call it. Instructor Vex has been staring at a wall for 3 hours. Car won't stop talking about you. Lyra named her next clutch after you. Clutch of Vance. That's a thing now. Mira tried to sit up. Her ribs screamed. She lay back down. What about the networks? Jax's face changed. He pulled out a datapad, swiped the screen. Oh, yeah, about that. The footage was grainy, shipboard security cams, mostly, but someone had edited it together, set it to music, and uploaded it to every major galactic news network. The title was simple, The Ghost. She watched herself walk through the corridors. Small, quiet, unremarkable. She watched herself save Kvar, save the drone, save Lyra. She watched herself sit down in front of a living nightmare and hum a lullaby until it broke. The comments were a war zone. This is fake. No unmodified species can do this. She's clearly a Xylos construct. Look at her eyes. I serve with humans. They're not warriors. They're janitors and poets and idiots who cry at movies. And then, buried beneath the hate, a different voice. A Thullian general. A real one, with verified credentials. You misunderstand. She is not a warrior. Warriors fight. She is a survivor. Survivors endure. There is no tactical counter for a species that refuses to die. The view count was in the billions. Mira put the datapad down. Her hand was shaking. Not from fear. From something else. Something she hadn't felt since the trench. Hope. Instructor Vex visited her that evening. He slithered into the medical bay, his bioluminescence dimmed, his expression unreadable. He carried a datapad and a small silver box. Cadet Vance, he said. Instructor. He paused, looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. Not her file, not her species. At her. The Croth have retreated. They have pulled back to the Cygnus Arm intelligence, suggests they are afraid. Silicon-based life forms don't feel fear, she said. They do now. He opened the silver box. Inside was a medal, a simple disc of polished steel, embossed with the Galactic Union seal. The Medal of Uncommon Valor, the highest honor the Union could give. Mira stared at it. I am logistics. You were. He placed the box on her bedside table. The Academy is being restructured. The combat track is being reevaluated. There's a motion before the Council to create a new specialty. Unconventional tactics. They want you to lead it. She didn't answer. She was looking at the medal, at the seal, at the weight of it. They're afraid of us, she said. Not a question. Vex's tentacles twitched. Yes. Good. She reached out and took the box. Closed her fingers around the medal. It was cold. Heavy. Real. I'll need a bigger cargo bay, she said. Vex almost smiled. Almost. I'll see what I can do. He left. The door hissed shut. Jax was asleep in the chair, his furry head lolling. The medical bay was quiet. The smart glass ceiling showed the stars, cold, distant, indifferent. Mira Vance looked up at them. She thought about the trench, about the pressure, about the fish with no eyes and big, stupid teeth. She smiled. It was not a nice smile. The networks were still buzzing. The forums were still screaming. But in the corridors of the Academy, in the barracks and the briefing rooms and the mess halls, a new word was being whispered. Not ghost, not spare part, human. They said it like a warning. 6 months later, the first class of the unconventional tactics track graduated. There were 12 of them, for species, for different ways of thinking about war. And one human instructor with a lazy eye and a scar on her hip. The final exercise was a simulation. A derelict research vessel. A hive mind parasite. The same sim of screams that had nearly broken Kvar. The new cadets walked through it like it was a grocery store. They didn't fight the voices. They didn't ignore them. They listened. And then they sang off-key lullabies. And told bad jokes. And cried. And laughed. And did all the stupid, messy, human things that no tactical manual had ever thought to include. The parasite didn't stand a chance. When the simulation ended, Instructor Vex watched the replay. He watched the cadets move through the nightmare, calm and strange and utterly incomprehensible. He thought about the word the Thulian general had used. Endure. He thought about the Mariana Trench, about the pressure, about the dark, and he realized, with a cold, certain dread, that the Galactic Union had made a terrible mistake. They had spent 1,000 years building weapons, ships, armies, fortresses. They had never once considered that the scariest thing in the universe might be a species that refused to stay dead. The networks called her the Ghost. The Academy called her Instructor. The Karath, if they could speak, would call her something else. Something that didn't translate. Something that meant, roughly, the one who hums in the dark. But the humans? The humans just called her Mira. And that, more than anything, was what scared the galaxy the most.